Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. My name is Monica Ahmed. I'm the Senior Communications Advisor here at RPRA. Thank you so much for taking the time to attend our consultation today. The consultation webinar for today is going to cover the proposed 2024 fees for the Hazardous Waste Program Registry. So this webinar will provide information about the consultation process and the proposed fees, as well as answer your questions. So just really quickly here. To ask a question, there's actually a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So if you just go ahead and click on that, type in your question or comment, and then hit send. Users can also upvote questions and comments, and what that'll do is it'll bump it up to the top of the queue and get your question answered quicker, or a question that you would like to see answered. We'll also have time during the webinar to answer questions. If we can't get to your question during the webinar, or if you have a very specific question, we ask that you please reach out to our team at consultations@rpra.ca. Again, that's consultations@rpra.ca, and we'll share that later in the presentation as well, in case you didn't catch it. But yeah, feel free to send those over to our team, and we'll be happy to help. We'll also be sharing the deck with you today. We'll send that over via email. And we are also recording today's session, and we'll be posting that recording to our website later this week, so you can reference it later on. Now, I'm just going to give folks a few more minutes to start joining. Got a few people here. Just going to let our numbers go up just a bit. And while we wait, just want to introduce Stacy Bowman, my colleague here, who will also be supporting. Hi, Stacy.
Hello. Thanks for joining, everybody.
Just going to give folks a few more minutes. I know we're not quite at our full registration yet. And in the meantime, I'll introduce you to Noah Gitterman, who's our General Counsel and Chief of Strategic Initiatives. No, we're just giving folks a few more minutes to join us because I see the numbers still climbing. All right. In there. All right, now I think you should be good to go ahead and start in just a minute or two, if that's all right with you. All right, that's an affirmative. Excellent. All right, got a few more. Looks like we'll probably still have a few more joining us after, but let's go ahead and get started. How do you feel about that, Noah?
That sounds good.
All right, excellent. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you with the next slide.
Okay, thanks so much, and thanks everyone for joining. We always start our consultations with a reminder of who we are, and so we're a regulator mandated by the Ontario government to do mostly two things. One is we administer resource recovery regulations under the RRCA and help wind up legacy recycling programs under the WDTA. And the second thing we do is provide digital registration and reporting services for the province's Ministry for Environment, Conservation and Parks. And we run the excess soil service and the hazardous waste program that we're talking about today. We're set up as an administrative authority of the government. That means we don't receive any government funding, and all of our operations are funded through the fees that we charge to our registrants. We're making this proposal as part of our fee setting process. So we typically set fees every year. That's what we've been doing so far since RPRA began. And we always consult first on a proposal, and then we release final fees after the consultation is over. Our fees are set by our board, and all of the feedback we get during the consultation period is wrapped up and submitted to our board. And we also release a consultation report once fees are finalized, responding to the feedback we've received. So we're proposing fees now for 2024. This is the second time we'll be doing that for the Hazardous Waste Program. We consulted on and set fees at the end of 2022 that have been in place since the start of 2023. And now we're proposing our 2024 registry fees. We also have a business plan for 2024 that will be posted soon on our website. And you will get a notice about that when it is posted. Thanks. Maybe the next slide. So we, as a provincial administrative authority, we have a mandate to implement the hazardous waste digital reporting service. So we created the registry, and now we operate it and maintain it and improve it. We're mandated to set and collect fees to recover all of our costs related to running the program, running the service, and to support registrants who are using the service. So just as a reminder, our registry service replaced the old HWIN system and the paper manifests that you used to use. The ministry continues to oversee the program as a whole and run compliance and enforcement. We run the reporting and manifest tracking service. Maybe next slide, please. So annually, our fees come from 3 sources. The fees we set on our producers that are part of the resource recovery programs under the RPRA. There are monthly fees that we assess to the industry funding organizations, the legacy ones under the WDTA, who are winding up legacy recycling programs. And then there's the fees that we set on the excess oil and hazardous waste programs, which are in both cases transaction-based. Next slide, please. A little bit more about our consultation process. We are obligated under our governing legislation to consult for 45 days and then post the final fees for 30 days before they come into effect. So our consultation this year started on October 2nd, will end on November 16th. Between then and December 1st, we'll have a board meeting where final fees will hopefully be determined, and then we'll post those fees likely on December 1st. So they will be in effect starting on Jan 1, 2024. Again, we're interested in getting your feedback through the consultation period. You can, in addition to asking questions during this session, you can email us at consultations@rpra.ca. There were some materials posted on our website, and I think emailed out to folks the beginning of the consultation. This webinar, recording of this webinar, and the materials for this webinar will also be posted on our website. If you do want to provide feedback, we do encourage to provide it as early as you can, and that helps us make sure that we can package it up properly for our board, who will be making the final decision. Next slide, please. Our high-level approach to fee setting, and you may recall this from last year, has 5 components. We start with our annual budget, and that's set through our business planning process. Again, we're obligated to set a business plan each year for the following year, and then forecast for 2 years after that. And that business plan sets a budget for the following year. And that's our starting point for setting fees for the next year. We then use a cost allocation methodology to allocate that budget among the programs we operate. We'll talk a bit more about the cost allocation model. We do operate on a shared services approach. So a lot of the services we provide are shared among our programs. So we have a methodology to allocate our resources or our budgeted resources among the different programs we operate. We then will sometimes include in step 3 an adjustment to recover deficits or surplus from the previous year. So if revenues are higher or lower than expected, or expenses are higher or lower than expected, there will be a deficit or surplus that stays with the program. And that gets wrapped up into future year fees. So if there's a large surplus, that may work to lower fee in future years. If there's a large deficit, that will have to get recovered by the program in future years. Then we take that really what I like to think of as a program budget or a program cost allocation, including the deficit or surplus number. And we apply that to our fee model, and we'll talk a bit more about the hazardous waste fee model. Then as the final step, we use estimates, typically about the number of fee payers and the amount of material we expect to be generated or reported through the registry to get our fee rate. And so I think in the following slides, we'll sort of walk through all of these steps. On to the next, please. Our budget starts with our strategic priorities. For 2024, they are the same or at least very similar to what they are in 2023. Number 1, to provide registrants with accessible and easy to use registry services, which is very relevant to the Hazardous Waste Program. Our second priority is about delivering an effective compliance program to help achieve resource recovery outcomes for the province. We do not run the compliance program for hazardous waste. So the resources that we put into our compliance team are not part of the budget that we allocate to the hazardous waste program. Number 3 is providing Ontario with reliable and useful resource recovery and waste information. As part of the hazardous waste program, we do have a public registry, and we report publicly on our registry data. We also have a portal that the ministry uses for its own work and sometimes to publish its own data. And then our fourth priority is ensuring that we're building an accountable and transparent and sustainable organization here at RPRA, where we're efficient and you can see where our money is going and what it's doing. And we're setting fees and projecting revenues in a way that's sustainable for us over the long term. Next slide, please. Here's a breakdown of our 2024 budget. It's compared here to our 2023 budget and also the forecast we had in our business plan for 2024. So our total expenses are roughly in line with what we forecasted last year. There are some pluses and minuses in each of the line items. Maybe let's go to the next slide because I think there's a better picture coming up. our first breakdown of our budget is between our resource recovery programs, the producer responsibility programs that deal with recycling, and then our digital reporting services, that's excess soil and hazardous waste, plus our WDTA program targets. So you can see the year-over-year change in those programs. So that budget change does hide a lot of variability among the individual programs, which you'll see when we get to our cost allocation methodology. And this is just showing an overall summary of each of those three main sources of revenue for RPRA. Next slide, please. Maybe actually, could you actually go back maybe 2 slides to the budget? Yeah, let's stop here. I thought maybe there was another slide breaking this down in a different way. But maybe just pausing here, there are some pluses and minuses. So you'll see that our salaries and benefits amount is higher than what we forecasted, and our registry and IT amount is higher than what we forecasted. And that's in part because we're investing more in our registry services to make sure we can maintain them for users, and that they continue to work for users, both in terms of the support we provide one-on-one and our back-end IT support. And I think some of those increases are offset a bit by a reduction in our projected amortization, which relates to how much we spend to build our registry, and professional fees. So I'm just highlighting there some of the sort of pluses and minuses in the overall budget. But again, we'll get to the cost allocation methodology next, and then to the hazardous waste budget. So let's skip ahead again to our cost allocation methodology. We use this again to allocate costs among our programs. So we run 8 registry programs that includes Haz Waste, excess soil, and 6 or so resource recovery programs. There's 4 main steps to the cost allocation methodology. So we start with direct costs for each program. And those are allocated directly to the program that incurs the cost, or that is budgeted to incur the cost in this case. A big piece of this is the cost to build the registry for that program. Each of our programs, including the producer responsibility ones, have their own registry portal, and the cost of that portal is allocated directly to the program that uses that portal. There are also foundational components to the registry that are shared across all the programs, and that also gets allocated to each of the programs it relates to. The next step is to assign common costs across all of the programs. So I said before, we operate on a shared services model. So a lot of our costs are indirect costs, like back office costs, like our board remuneration, leadership team and administrative salaries, office supplies, that kind of thing. And then shared services costs. A big component of that is our salaries and benefits, and our IT services and supports. And so we have a model that allocates those costs across each of our programs. And we use cost drivers to sort of match resources to the programs that are using those resources. And the cost driver we use sort of depends on which cost line we're looking at. So for example, our compliance staff salaries would not be allocated to hazardous waste. We would not use a cost driver for those that included hazardous waste registrants. But a lot of our cost drivers are based on number of registrants, which dictates to a large part the resources needed to support the program. For 2024, compared to 2023, a greater portion of our budget is being allocated using cost drivers based on the number of registrants. And we're doing that to better align our allocations with where the activity is, with where our support resources are going. And that is a change that impacts hazardous waste and as we'll see later, there is a budget increase for hazardous waste for 2024. And part of that is because we are allocating more resources in our budget to the program in 2024 compared to 2023. The third step is contributions to our operating reserve. And that's just done based on the program's proportionate share of total expenses for the year. Our operating reserve is something that we use through the year to manage our cash flow. It's currently targeted at 40% of our total budget. We have a limit in our operating agreement with the ministry that it cannot exceed 50% of our budget. Our current target is to get it to 40%. And so that's why we're each of the programs contributes to that reserve to make sure we've got enough in reserve there to help us get through the year and also deal with unexpected things that happen to us that aren't part of our budget. The final amount is a small amount that relates to startup costs when RPRA was first created, and those startup costs are allocated equally to each of our programs. Next slide, please. This slide is really an overview. I think it's similar to a slide we showed last year of what your fees are being used to recover, or what costs they're being used to recover. So again, part of it is registry development plus the interest on that development. So registry costs, what we spent to build the digital reporting service, is amortized over a 10-year period, plus financing costs on top of that. And so that is that whole cost is recovered through fees to hazardous waste registrants. There is an operating cost deficit from 2021 and 2022, which is because we were working on the program and we had operating costs devoted to the program even before we were charging fees. And so that amount needs to get recovered. And so we're recovering that over, it says 3-year period here, but we've extended that to a 4-year period to try and spread it out a bit more. And then, of course, our registry implementation. So this covers our registry support officers, call center costs, our IT support costs, and general admin. So things like our phone and email support, our business and IT support for reporting your waste, for using the electronic manifesting, for using the mobile app, for keeping the public registry running, the training and guidance material. You see the API we have for high volume users that lets them connect directly to our registry, and of course a portal we maintain for the ministry, so they can access the information they need to run their program. Next slide, please. Here is an overview of our cost allocations by program. You can see HWP at the bottom. So it is a budget increase year over year. And again, that's mostly due to there being a higher proportion of registrants in the hazardous waste program compared to the other programs in 2024. And a greater portion of our budget being allocated based on number of registrants. There are some additional direct costs that we had not predicted in 2023, like for call center support and IT. But most of that amount relates to the fact that we're essentially devoting more registry support and IT resources to the Haz Waste program than we had predicted for 2023. Next slide, please. Here is a breakdown. We may have another view of this later in the slideshow, but this is a breakdown of the components of that budget for each of the programs, so you can compare across programs. Again, the first line, amortization, I already spoke about that. That is the recovery of the cost to build the hazardous, the capital cost to build the hazardous waste digital reporting service, amortized over 10 years. There's an interest amount under that, so that's the interest cost to pay that back, plus I believe the costs related to our operating deficit. We'll get to that, I think, in a couple of slides. There's some direct costs related to outside call center support, mostly. I think some call center support, some IT. And then our common costs, indirect and shared. And again, most of that is our registry support team and IT team, and other IT costs that are dedicated to Haz Waste. And then an amount for the reserve contribution, the operating reserve I talked about, and this startup cost from when RPRA was created. And there's the total budget at the bottom. And maybe let's go to the next slide. So I think we're now at step 3 in our fee setting process, where we would incorporate surpluses and deficits. So there is a deficit for hazardous waste from the 2021 and 2022 calendar years. Those are the years we were building the registry. So we had operating costs relating to that build, costs that weren't incorporated into the amortized capital cost, because we had a bunch of people working to deliver the registry on time. And those costs those operating costs were financed, and so we need to recover them from the program. And we are recovering them over, we had originally set a 3-year period, but we've extended that for 4 years in order to try to spread it out a bit more. Next slide, please. think this is the view of the program with the deficit recovery built in. So the total cost recovery with that 2021 and 2022 operating deficit built in is 8.3 million. That's a 12% increase compared to 2023. Next slide, please. Oh, we can stop here for questions. So I think before I get into the actual rates, if folks have questions about what I presented so far, I can get to them, or we can keep moving.
Yeah, looks like you are good to keep moving unless we get any questions. Maybe give it a second. Just a reminder, the Q&A tab is at the bottom. Oh, we do have a comment actually that just came in. No, so there is a comment / question, I guess. Please be aware, inflation is at 4%, and you are just justifying a 90% increase because of too many customers. This is sort of question, sort of a comment. I don't know if that's something.
Yeah. So yeah, so we understand that it's the increase is bigger than inflation, and I think that's in part because this is a new program for us, and we're still figuring out the resources we need to make sure we're running it the way registrants expect for it to be run. And we have learned a bit so far in 2023 about what it's required to keep it running. And so we're budgeting that increase for 2024 based on our experience so far, to make sure that we can continue to provide the service that registrants expect and need. We are, we understand that registrants across all our programs want and expect to see less variability in fees year over year, and that's something RPRA is hoping to achieve as new programs stabilize. And we learn as much as we can about what it takes to deliver them. So hopefully that helps a bit to respond to the comment.
Great, thanks, Noah. And just another reminder that if anyone does have any other questions that they don't want to share in the webinar, or that for whatever reason aren't shared, you can always email us at consultations@rpra.ca. So with that, Noah, looks like there's no other questions here. So I'm going to let you go ahead and continue on with the presentation. Thanks.
Let's go to the next slide. So here is our fee rate proposal. So there's sort of two pieces that go into this. One is the fee model, and one is our estimates related to volume. So our fee model we're proposing is going to be the same as what it was in 2020, or what it is in 2023. So we'll have flat fee for each manifest, and then a tonnage fee for hazardous waste that gets shipped. In each case, there are exclusions. Those are all set out in the subject waste regulation under our governing statute. You can see here the increases we're proposing in order to recover the 2024 budget. So it's again, it's an $8.3 million budget that includes recovery of deficit from 21 and 22 of about $500,000. So that's 1/3 of the remaining deficit. Some of it was recovered in 2023, and then we'll have 3 more years of recovery. We're also proposing to increase the manifest fee and the tonnage fee. The manifest fee increase is proportionately higher, and that's in part to reflect the fact that there are a lot of manifests that we track and support through the registry that don't have a tonnage fee attached to them, but still generate registry support needs. So we're proposing an increase for manifests in addition to the tonnage rate increase. You can see our volume estimates on the page as well in terms of number of estimates and estimated tons. Those are similar to what they are for 2023. So I think we're tracking in the registry to hit the manifest and tonnage numbers we had expected. So we're assuming the same or similar will happen in 2024. And so the tonnage fee and the manifest fees sort of work out to about $1.5 million from manifest fees, from the flat manifest fee alone, and another 6.8 from tonnage fees. Next slide, please. This is another breakdown of the hazardous waste budget or registry allocation. I think it's all information you've already seen, maybe just summarized a bit differently. So year over year, it's a 12% increase. We reduced the deferred operating costs. That's that deficit from 21 and 22. We reduced that amount by adding another recovery year on to try to spread it out more. Manage the year over year increase a little bit, which is why the total increase is at 12% instead of 19%. I think I explained sort of most of the cost differences from 1 year from 23 to 24. So the biggest jump obviously is those share costs, which is really our that registry support, our officers answering phones and emails, and the IT folks making sure the system keeps running as we expect. Next slide, please. I think there's a summary of all of the programs year over year. So we don't need to spend a lot of time on that, but you can see a full view, and there's more detail in the proposal that's on our website if you're interested in what's happening with the other programs. Next slide, please. And then I think we're at the end of the substantive part of the presentation. So again, we like to hear feedback, both on our approach and on some of the assumptions we're making. So, for example, we've made assumptions about volume for 2024. We're proposing to distribute the year-over-year budget increase between the tonnage fee and the manifest fee. So those are some of the things we'd like to get feedback on, in addition to the overall fee rate proposal. And we encourage you to email us. Also, if you have questions, you can also email us, and we will try to get back to you as quickly as we can and within the consultation period. And the sooner you can get us questions or the sooner you can get us feedback, the better. So I'll leave it there and see if there's any more questions. I think there is another session for the Hazardous Waste Program we planned. The content will be the same, but if there are questions that you have between now and then, you can join and ask them, or just email us and we'll respond by email.
Thanks, Noah. Yes, that's right. The next session for Hazardous Waste Program is going to be on October 16th. If you have a look at the email that you received, or there's also information about that, including how you can sign up on our website. Now, just jumping back to collecting feedback, I'm just going to launch a really quick poll here. Something that we do typically just to make sure that we're giving registrants and stakeholders the information that they want in a format that works for them. So if you wouldn't mind taking just about 30 seconds to answer some of our poll questions, I'll go ahead and leave that open for you for the next few minutes. Just waiting for some of these responses to come through, but looks like we'll be wrapping up a bit earlier than planned today. Thank you everyone for your responses. I still see a bunch coming in, so I will leave that open to make sure everyone has a chance to respond.
In the meantime, Monica, there is a question that just came in. Oh, a couple now.
Great.
So maybe we could answer those as well.
For sure. Thanks, Stacey. So Noah, I'll go ahead and start with the first one here. Is there a plan to drop the rates after 4 years of recovering the cost to build the system?
So yes and no. So the yes is that after 4 years, we won't be recovering that initial deferred operating cost anymore. So that line in the budget will be gone. So that's $500,000 this year. So if we're done recovering, that'll be $500,000 that won't be there 3 years from now. The thing I can't predict is what the rest of the budget will look like. So I don't know the impact that will have on the rates, but it will be a line that should be coming out of the budget once that gets recovered. Then there's also the amortization amount, which is a 10-year amortization. So eventually that'll drop away, although likely not completely, because we need to keep investing in the system. So there will always be some capital investments ongoing to make sure it keeps running and is up to date. So there are sort of two kind of time limited costs, one long-term 10-year period, and then this deficit recovery, which is another 3 years.
Thank you, Noah. I'm just gonna go ahead and end the poll just in case anyone wants to get some last minute responses there. It's going once, going twice. All righty, and I'm going to actually go back to our questions here. So we got one more. It's kind of a clarification. Apologies if I misunderstood, but it was originally stated that we were expecting a 19% increase, but the broken down fee table showed other. So in brackets, 20% for flat fee, 10% for tonnage. And sorry, just a quick correction there, the table showed otherwise is what this person wanted to say. So did you, let me know if you want to reread that question for you, Noah, or? No,
I think I've got it. So that's right. The allocated budget year over year is a 19% increase, but that does not account for the deficit recovery. And that when we add in the deficit recovery, the year over year increase is only 12%. And that's because we've extended that deficit recovery out. So our deficit recovery in 24, we're predicting will be less than what we had set for 2023. So the overall total cost recovery allocation of hazardous waste is a 12% increase year over year. And that's divided up 20% of a flat fee increase, which is a smaller proportion of the budget, and 10% for tonnage. And so that combined is a 12% increase.
Great, thanks, Noah. So that's it for the questions in the queue, actually. So I guess we can continue on. So I'm going to go ahead and put myself back. Well, that was short-lived. I guess this was for any additional questions that we had. So again, if there's anyone else online that wants to share any extra questions now, or you can email them directly to us. But otherwise, Noah, I think it's
that's it. Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for joining. And again, I'll just repeat, if you do have questions, we are here to respond to them. And we welcome your feedback between now and mid-November. So thank you.
Thank you, Noah. And thanks again for everyone who attended today. Just a quick reminder that we'll be sharing the slides with you via email, and the webinar recording and the deck will also be available on our website later this week. Thanks, and have a good one, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.